From the archives of the Great Library of Arathes, Golden City of Elves, the wise scholars of Grey Sage present the unlikely and highly questionable accounts from those who were avowed witness. These are the suspenseful investigations of the human, Fraenk Neversleep, Arch-Preceptor of Blackroot. And now, the Neversleep Scrolls, Circle of the Mind Thief, written by Philip Walton. The story continues. Chapter 34.
You're staring.
A tiny, frail voice spoke from the ex-wizard's bed. Fraenk had been sitting in an overstuffed chair watching her. He was exhausted, but he couldn't allow himself to rest, just in case. Sometimes she was so still, her lungs rising so little that he thought she had stopped breathing. But then she took a deeper, sighing breath, and he could see it again. The tiny ship of hope was battered by the storm, and even feared loss too many times for his ragged emotions to deal with. But somehow he held on. Hope was all he had. "No, I'm not," Fraenk said, palming away the delirious tears that had sprang unbidden from his eyes. "I was just waiting to tell you how foolish it was for you to steal that necklace from me."
It wasn't yours to be stolen.
Kyla murmured. "We stopped the poison. It was really bad, and you almost—" Fraenk broke off for a moment and cleared his throat. "Valthor said when you had a chance to rest, he'd take you to a temple and get healed the rest of the way. That is, if you're actually still alive and not one of those returned dead, hungry for human flesh."
I ate already.
Kyla cracked one eye open, and her mouth pulled tight in an attempted smile. Fraenk could see her visibly returning back to herself with each passing moment.
Who's Valthor?
"He's the ex-wizard who lives in the lighthouse. He also was the one who created the mind thief." Both of her eyes popped open, panicked and unfocused. She made a feeble effort to pull the blankets off her and get up, but her body had no strength. "Stop struggling. You'll just wear yourself out," Fraenk said.
Can't be here.
Kyla managed to squeak before falling back, exhausted. "He knows you stole it, and he helped you anyway. I'm sure you'll have a few things to discuss," Fraenk said, standing. "I'll be back to check on you later."
Where are you going?
Her eyes were closed, and she sounded ready to fall asleep. "I left a few tasks uncompleted, and a hell-touched, still breathing." Fraenk swept on his cloak. He paused to watch her for a moment. Eyes closed, her chest gently rose and fell. He couldn't tell if she'd drifted off already. "Kyla," Fraenk said softly. "I need you to hear my words. As soon as you're feeling well, I want you to leave Arathes. You said it yourself. There's nothing here for you. I'll get you some coin to start over wherever you like, but it can't be here." She made no reply. There was only the soft tick, plink and burble from the various brass tubes in the room, and the continuous low rumbling grind of the gears that drove the lighthouse lantern above. Fraenk wasn't even sure she was still awake to hear him, but then a single tear rolled from the corner of her eye back onto the pillow. He turned and headed to the front door of the lighthouse. Fraenk looked back and was surprised to see Valthor sitting quietly at his workbench. This time he wasn't bent over some contraption, but looking at Fraenk. The ex-wizard bore a grave expression. Their gazes met. Fraenk looked hurt and haunted, but Valthor's eyes were etched by years of wisdom and pain. He understood and gave Fraenk a curt nod. Outside the lighthouse, Fraenk took a moment to tighten the saddle and tack of his stolen mount. Even though he told himself he was planning his next action, Fraenk was really just stalling. He wanted to go back inside and tell Kyla what? What would he say? What did he even feel? No. How he left things was how they needed to be. No past and no future. If you have nothing, then nothing can be taken from you. That was his sworn oath, sacrosanct as the pledge of any paladin. "I'm sure your rider is going to step outside and wonder where he parked you." Fraenk patted the horse on its shoulder and smiled. Then, kicking one boot into a stirrup, he swung up into the saddle. With a gentle prod, he spurred them forward, back down the jetty and towards the city. The air was brisk and seemed to cool that hot, tightening feeling in his chest that was trying to build the further he got from the lighthouse. He rode past the docks and harbour, cutting through an alley and negotiating the horse up a flight of stone steps, which he seemed to be more nervous about than the steed. Fraenk was still forming possibilities on how he could both recover the necklace and bury Brimblade when a group of filthy children emptied out into the street in his path. Fraenk reined up hard to keep the horse from trampling them. Their de facto leader was a tall, skinny boy, appropriately dubbed the name Stick, that Fraenk remembered as the ones who tipped him off when this whole bloody affair began. "That's a good way to take a hoof, lads," Fraenk said when he'd gotten the horse sidled to a halt.
"They's iron for you, Neversleep,"
Stick said, apparently unconcerned for his safety. "Who is? And for why?" Fraenk found himself unconsciously slipping into their street patois.
"Look at the big thumper. All nerve seas."
This drew laughter from the other kids.
"Oh, I know it, and you don't."
Stick jutted out his jaw, a defiant-looking gesture that merely meant he asserted the truth of his words. The further the stretch was the indication of the strength of its verity. Then he uncrossed his spindly arms and stuck out a hand. Fraenk knew something was going down if the alley rats had news of it, but what exactly they might be referring to was anyone's guess, at least until their toll had been extracted. Stick curled his fingers in a gimme motion. Fraenk made a show of deliberation, hesitating to be squeezed of valuable coppers just for a few words of knowledge. That was the game after all, and both sides had to play their part. But inside, he delighted in any opportunity to press a coin into their scrawny hands. Fraenk would have paid them if they came to him with the basic information that the sky had been blue, or water was wet, or that the streets of the city at night were cold and hard to sleep on. But the alley rats were a tough lot, wild as any scrate and probably even more untamable. They trusted no adult, especially the ones who came with generous offers of food, money, or warm beds under a roof. The fools who fell for those lies didn't last long on the street. Finally, after the appropriate amount of reluctance, Fraenk flicked 2 copper coins to Stick and cinched his coin purse string tight again, signalling the end of negotiations. The boy frowned and shook his head at the money, but Fraenk could see a pleased smile threatening to bloom on his face. "Well, what is it?" Fraenk demanded.
"Your mommo's iron for you,"
Stick said, making the entire group of children sound a scandalized, "You're in for it. Oh!" They laughed and elbowed each other, but Fraenk felt his heart almost stop. For an instant, Fraenk saw a brief but perfectly clear image of his mother's face. He couldn't even remember her name, and he thought he'd lost her visage years ago, but somehow he could now see her. She was giving him that sad smile like the day that she sent him to town with Henrietta the sow.
"Neversleep?"
Stick was watching him warily, ready to flee if he needed to. Fraenk saw he was gripping the coin purse in a clenched fist. "What did you say?" Fraenk asked carefully.
"Your mommo, Queen Elf Lady. They's asking about you. Got her house clubbies out, iron for you and everything."
He felt himself exhale. "Oh, that's not my mother. She's Lady Blackroot and... Wait, she's looking for me." "Why?" Fraenk asked, but the kids were already spooked. They scrambled away through a narrow alley where the horse couldn't follow, whooping and jostling one another. It was best to let them go anyway, they wouldn't know much else. But now Fraenk had a much more urgent situation. Had something bad happened to Lady Blackroot, or the district, while he was out dealing with this infuriating necklace situation? He realized it had been far too long since he had last briefed her on his work. And if he was honest, she was not likely to be pleased about what he had been busying himself with lately. Altercations with the Fernbrooks, a near kobold riot in Rounderville, his direct involvement with a prisoner escape at the Hornet's Hive, and this latest fracas at the museum. Fraenk then just realized he left Doran Leafwater with his head in the mouth of that beast. Too late to do anything at this point. The morning guard shift would have found him by now anyways. As much as he hated to leave Lady Blackroot out of the circle, Fraenk needed more time to recover the necklace and stop Lord Fernbrooks' diabolical scheme, assuming he could figure out what it was first. If Lady Blackroot knew about any one of his troublesome, yet perfectly reasonable at the time actions, she may not look so favourably on it and do something rash, like demote him or have him sent to the black cells with his old friend Carrick's the Cutthroat. Fraenk decided that the best thing was to continue to avoid her entirely, until he could at least thwart Lord Fernbrook by getting the mind thief back in hand. Then he could weather whatever tempest she threw at him. With that much resolved, at least, Fraenk turned his borrowed horse on the cobbles back in the direction of the Royal Museum, where he might pick up the trail of Brimblade and also hopefully return the mare to its rightful owner without much fuss.
Arch-Preceptor!
Fraenk cringed. How had they found him even before he got going? He briefly weighed the idea of spurring the horse on and pretending like he had not heard, but that was likely to ignite a greater response from the Blackroot guards. Fraenk was fine with expending his own time on apparently frivolous quests for magical mind-destroying jewellery, but to put more of a strain on Lady Blackroot's guards was irresponsible and dangerous. So, biting back his annoyance, Fraenk wheeled the horse around to face the approaching man. Fraenk recognized him immediately as one of the men who was nearly assigned to his security when Fraenk first rode out the gates, ready to draw an assassin's arrow. The man looked relieved to see him.
Arch Neversleep, sir. We've been looking for you,
he said. Yes. Woodlarch? Fraenk tried to recall the man's name.
Woodmire, sir. You're needed back at the estate, sir. Something urgent for Lady Blackroot.
What did she say? The guard adjusted the spear in his grip and shifted uncomfortably. Well? Fraenk asked.
I can't repeat it this close to a holy temple,
Woodmire said. Fraenk could see the spire of Kyleria's cathedral was a good 5 blocks distant over the rooftops. Huh, that bad, eh? Woodmire nodded. Well, what's the version of it you could say in front of a paladin?
Her lady is requesting your immediate presence for a matter of great urgency, and you're not her favourite human at the moment. In fact, you're a no-good, feckless fowl. Skark-brained, slossing 3-legged crook with gout, a black-blooded, skite-slapping, oversized pile of slossing horse skit on a rainy day. Let's see. I think that's everything Lady Blackroot said about you, sir.
Woodmire finished just as he and Fraenk entered the gates of Blackroot Estate. Although they had ridden horses, the journey from the district in the lower level to the estate in the uppers had still taken enough time to fill a small tome with the almost poetic, long-form cussing that one could acquire over centuries as an elf. And that's the clean version, you say? Fraenk asked. Woodmire nodded emphatically.
I wouldn't dare repeat the other stuff.
Ah, all right, Woodmire. As you were. I'll find my way from here. Fraenk had no sooner stepped indoors when he was collected by an altogether humourless guard that refused to let him refill his empty hooch bottle, and a wrinkle-faced servant matron whose pinched, disapproving countenance always made Fraenk wonder if the woman ate enough greens to facilitate a healthy digestive schedule. This time, instead of being tossed bodily before the Dame and Council of Acherons, Fraenk was delivered to Lady Blackroot's personal chambers. When he entered, she was seated in front of a 3-panel mirror and wearing only an elaborately stitched robe over her underthings, while her maidservants flitted about her picking up various other garments that were scattered about the floor. Fraenk held up a hand to shield his eyes. Whoa! Surely nothing I've done deserves this kind of punishment, Fraenk quipped.
Where have you been, Neversleep?
Lady Blackroot snapped.
Still very droll, I see.
Well, I was...
Save your excuses for someone who might actually believe them,
she said. A maidservant approached, carrying a billowy dress stitched with delicate silk flowers. Lady Blackroot considered it for a few moments, then waved it off with a flick of her hand.
No, that won't do. Too pink, I'll look like I'm wearing the bung of a landkraken.
Fraenk had already made his way to her various decanters of spirits and grabbed the first bottle at hand, pouring himself half a glass.
Go light on that, Fraenk. I need your wits about you. We have a problem.
Lord Fernbrooks, Neversleep, guessed. Judging by the look she jabbed his way in the mirror, he was correct.
So, you know already?
I know my side of the tale. What is it on yours? Another invitation to gamble away part of the district? Lady Blackroot fixed him with a cold glare that made Fraenk lower his glass. Perhaps he had overstepped too far this time. He nearly began to apologize when another maidservant came forth, bearing a dress even more whimsical and impractical than the last one. She waved this one away sharply as well.
High Lord Whiteleaf has invited us to a grand gala at his residence in the Summer Palace.
Lady Blackroot said tersely. Fraenk raised a curious eyebrow. So the boy prince stirs in his golden cage. I'm surprised the High Council of Elves even allowed our beloved Warden of the Pale and Protector of Arathis to make that kind of big decision.
Of course not. My ladies informed me that Lord Fernbrooks was seen leaving the High Lord's residence yesterday, and come the morning we have a fresh invitation waiting for this delightful surprise. If we had any warning about this, we would have stepped on it harder than a brown grease beetle.
Fraenk added another splash to his glass and began to pace. All the High Council will be there? And Lord Whiteleaf? Fraenk asked.
We would not be so rude as to refuse our lord's generous offer, she
said with venomous courtesy. Don't go. Find some excuse. Fernbrooks planning something big, my lady. I don't know what exactly, but I'm afraid he now has the means to pull it off.
Oh, I won't be going,
Lady Blackroot said and turned in her seat to face him with a devious smile.
You and I will be going together.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another exciting episode. And remember, the learned scholars of Grey Sage caution you that the veracity of these events remains unproven. Now go safe in the light of the powers, until our hands clasp again.